Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to give it one quick moment while we get everybody admitted from the waiting room. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and then if anybody else joins through the session, they can just kind of be added as we go. So good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Better Hospitality Conference. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Julian. I am the Managing Director of the Sustainable Restaurant Association. So we are a not-for-profit membership organization that works with hospitality businesses, kind of big and small, of all different varieties, on sustainability. So our Food Made Good framework is a really holistic viewpoint on sustainability. And one of the key aspects from our perspective is people, and looking at the kind of impact that a restaurant has on the community. And from our perspective, that doesn't just mean the impact on the wider community, but also the restaurant community within itself. And we very much believe that how you treat your people, train your people, hire your people, progress your people is a sustainability issue, and is essential to building an industry that is both environmentally regenerative and socially progressive. So I'm really excited to be hosting this panel this morning, and excited to hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to Dominique for setting up this conference and inspiring some of these conversations that really need to be happening within the sector in order for us to build back better. So I'm going to hand over to Joanna to introduce herself, and then we will go ahead and get our discussion started.
Hi, good morning everybody. My name's Joanna. I'm a director at an organisation called WIHTL, and we are an organisation that strives to increase representation at all levels, but particularly senior level leadership levels in the hospitality, travel, and leisure industry of women and people from ethnic minorities. And the work that we do is we bring companies together to really drive representation, but also to build inclusive cultures as well, so that anybody, whoever they are, can thrive and reach their potential. And we have a mission that we want to positively impact 5 million people globally by 2025 from within the industry. So I'll pass to Lorraine, my co-panel.
Thank you. My name is Lorraine Copes. I am the founder of Be Inclusive Hospitality, and we are a social enterprise, not-for-profit, with a mission to accelerate race equality within the hospitality sector. And we do that in 3 ways. The first is we offer diversity and inclusion consultancy. We also develop and deliver initiatives which support upward social mobility of employees and entrepreneurs within the hospitality sector. And last but not least, we also host a series of events which centres people of colour having conversations and using hospitality as a vehicle to facilitate that. I think something really important just to add is that all of the work that we do is underpinned by data and insights. And for that reason, we have done a series of pieces of work which explore the experiences of Black and Asian people within the sector in particular, and we're soon to release a white paper on that. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm so interested to hear hopefully some insights from the white paper and the research that you guys have been carrying out. I suppose let's jump straight in. I think this is a really essential conversation for us to be having as an industry, and really sort of centering how we create diverse and inclusive workspaces. And it feels to me as though the pandemic has only, I guess, emphasized and brought forward some of the issues that have been lying under the surface when it comes to hospitality and inclusion. We've seen over the last few months, protests and kind of social justice movements around race and racism, and there's huge implications for hospitality within that. And we've also seen movements around women and women's safety, and again, huge implications for hospitality around that. So I was wondering if each of you guys could give us a bit of a synopsis around where you think we are as an industry. If you were to stop and take stock at a moment in which the industry has been closed for about 12, or up in upheaval for 12 months, we're about to reopen. If you were looking to your right and looking to your left, give me a kind of state of the sector from your vantage point. Lorraine, perhaps you could start.
Something I didn't add in my introduction, actually. I've worked in the hospitality sector for 20 years. So my discipline is procurement. I've led procurement teams for Gordon Ramsay Group, Corbin & King, Shake Shack, and some other really large, well-known brands. And throughout my 20-year career, especially when progressing to exec director level, I am never in a decision-making room with anyone else of colour. And that has been consistent for 20 years. And the numbers also reflect that through Labour ONS. So where I would say that we are as a hospitality sector is there's a lot of work to do. The hospitality sector is not alone because we are dealing with a societal issue. But I think that the hospitality sector has been slow in coming forward of even acknowledging there's a problem to address. And so, just reiterating my point, where I believe we are is we're at the very start of the journey, of which, my organisation, we're working with quite a sizable number of SMEs that are keen to move things forward, but that's, relatively small in the grand scheme of the size of the industry.
Absolutely. Joanna, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you made the point, Julian, about the pandemic. And I think the pandemic in many ways has highlighted and exacerbated levels of equity and areas that perhaps were there, but obviously not completely at the forefront of people's minds, rightly or wrongly. And the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women and people from ethnic minorities, particularly in our sector. And now, we did a piece of research with PwC last year on the impact of COVID on gender and ethnic diversity in our industry. And we have lost a huge amount of talent because, whether it's the majority of women, 60% of our workforce in this industry are women. And, they tend to fill the frontline roles. And a lot of the frontline roles through furlough, they've left the workforce because of childcare, or they've been made redundant. And there's also been a disproportionate impact on talent from ethnic minorities. So the pandemic has created an opportunity, I think, for organisations. We're building back, we're starting to open, we're starting to have that feeling, but there is a lot of work to mitigate. So we have to be very careful as an industry. We have made some progress. I think the state of the industry is that before the pandemic, there was some progress, probably more on gender, but the pandemic has the potential to take that back and to lose that progress. And we must be really careful not to do that and to mitigate the impacts of companies that have done all they can just to survive this year. We know that, and not go out of business. So, but it's about now, right, what is the mitigating the impact of what's happened with the impact? And again, we're doing a piece of research on how you really truly drive gender equality in this space. So for example, we're a 7-day-a-week business. Why is there not 7-day-a-week childcare? So, so we're doing a piece of research on there. So I think there are pockets of good practice. I think there are companies that are doing well in certain areas, but as an industry as a whole, for an industry that is so diverse and so full of opportunity, there's definitely more that needs to be done.
I think you've made some really great points, both of you guys, around some of these structural structural changes for an industry needed for an industry that is at the kind of base broadest sense quite a diverse industry. We know that hospitality employs 10% of the population, and I think perhaps, you know, Lorraine, you made the point around decision makers, and I think often it gets blurred because people look around at what they see in terms of frontline staff and in terms of waiters, in terms of you know, representation in the industry, and would say hospitality is quite diverse. And yet there seems to be this funnel as you go through hospitality. Yeah, so I was wondering if you could maybe speak to a bit about what some of those structural barriers are to inclusion in terms of mobility, and what conversations really we need to be having in order to change that.
I think I'd add to what you've said around the numbers piece. So you mentioned that hospitality is 10% of you know, all employment. To put it into perspective, 17% of the hospitality sector identify as Black, Asian, or ethnic minority. So that's in advance or ahead of, you know, population-wise, the representation. But what we do know is that 17% often occupy, you know, really junior roles, low-paid roles within the sector, and also actually suffer pay penalties. So last year we did a piece of work with a company called the Resolution Foundation, and they took the labour ONS data and analysed disparities by ethnicity, and it highlighted, and we look at pay penalties because it actually looks at a like-for-like person with a similar background as far as education, similar role, and if you are of colour, you earn proportionally less than your white male counterpart, whether that's male or female. So there's tons and tons of stats to support this. And whilst I agree with Joanna that there is still a way to go forward as far as gender diversity, I think a lot of the questions that are being posed about what next are being framed differently when it comes to race equality versus gender. And actually, it starts with firstly understanding where you are here and now, but being really intentional around what it is within your business that you want to achieve and change. And so I think that the conversations that need to be had are honest ones, and that's not necessarily publicly honest, but actually within the confines of your leadership team. And the other thing that I'll add to that, and it's something that we have started to do an awful lot of, is act as an advisory member of the team. Because if you're sitting in a decision-making team with 10 other white, largely male, and sometimes female, having conversations about inclusion from a race aspect, I'm not sure that you have the appropriate voices in the room to really factor in what needs to be quite simply factored in. So, just reiterating my point in terms of what needs to happen, it really is holding a mirror up and understanding why your business looks and feels the way it does. That has to be the starting point before you move forward to recruiting diversely or leadership and development programs. And I say that because since we incorporated last year, the number one reason why businesses get in touch is for diverse candidates. Now, coincidentally, we are launching a jobs board. However, that is not the number one step that you should be taking. You should be looking at where you are here and now and why your business isn't diverse. And I say diverse, not in the technical term. When I say diverse, I'm talking about representation at all levels, not just at the most junior ones.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think you raise a really good point around this, like, jumping to a solution that has been happening in terms of hiring, diverse hiring, or even to some extent, some of this being framed as like diversity and inclusion, when really there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had around our biases, around our structural, the structural barriers. And I think, Joanna, using the experience potentially of women in hospitality and some of the research that you guys have done, you mentioned just even in your intro around 7-day-a-week industry, and we don't have childcare 7 days a week. And so there are some real kind of structural social things that push women out of this industry. The hours, the lack of childcare, the pay disparity when it comes to then having to pay for somebody else to take care of your children. I remember being at a panel once where somebody was pointing out that like housing is a food equity issue, because if your housing costs too much, then you can't afford to pay for food. So I think there is this question of like, what are these wider structural issues? And if employers in the industry really want to change them, it can't just start from hiring differently. They really need to think internally around their policies and their structures. And I wondered if Joanna, especially in the work that you guys have been doing around looking for candidates of good practice, and then Lorraine, some of the consultancy you guys have been doing, do you have some examples of businesses that have broken down some of those internal structural barriers that have then led to more equity throughout the business?
Well, I think the businesses that I know that do this well do some core things, which, building on Lorraine's point, they have courage and they are brave enough to have the difficult conversations. They use data effectively, and because a lot of businesses we know within our industry don't have great systems. Most of our business still works off Excel spreadsheets, let's be honest, whatever company you work in, but you don't, you need some core data to understand, back to Lorraine's point, what is happening in your organization. So courage, curiosity, and the most important piece then is action, because that's where your credibility and your authenticity happens. And I think what the data will tell you is where your company is at, and what is the pace that you need to go at, essentially, and what are the interventions that you need to put in place, and how important, how urgent they are as well. Because a lot of the interventions, I think there are two things. I think there is structural, and then I think there is the piece where you help people feel included. And the two run parallel at the same time. And the thing is that some of those interventions will take longer than others, but that is not an excuse to act. And I also believe that budget is not an excuse not to act as well. And I think that it comes from the top, it comes from role modeling, it comes from courage, it comes from authenticity. And I'll give you a couple of examples of where I think is great practice. So operationally, from a gender perspective, you have great gender representation right up to regional level. Site manager all the way up. If you're talking about an operation, whether it's hotels or restaurants, and my background is hospitality, you come, and then operationally, when you start to get into wider area management, you will see a huge drop off from a gender perspective, and also from other diverse groups as well. And we have to think as an industry, we have to really shake up the way we work. The pandemic, one of the great things it's done is we've had to work differently for so quickly, and businesses had to turn on a penny to work and do differently. Let's capture that innovation that we've done. Let's capture the digital opportunities. Two examples I'll give you. So one pub company that we worked with, they were the first operational company that I know that brought in part-time operation managers. And they did that by reducing the size of the patches, because I still cannot believe that usually patches or areas are still from Swansea to Norfolk in some businesses. I mean, it's crazy. So think differently about the operation, and that would be my take there. And also it's really thinking about from a gender perspective. I think from every person's perspective, everyone has cycles in their life, cycles when they start their career, cycles when they become parents. It's not just about mums, it's about dads. Only 1% of men take shared parental leave. Now that is a really telling statistic, and my instinct tells me a lot of that is cultural. They feel they will be sidelined and dismissed at work if they even broach the question, which is where women were 10, 15 years ago, when we talked about how long you took for maternity leave. So as leaders, really try and look and be innovative, creative, and think, leave the traditions aside.
I think that's a really good point. Though I that issue around kind of shared leave and parental leave, I do think is quite interesting and dynamic, in that there's so much stigma around it in this feeling that you can't take that parental leave. And yet I find that when men do take parental leave, so my husband took parental leave for both our children, when they do, men are actually quite often applauded for it at work and celebrated and almost like promote it. Like there's almost more attention on them. They get more senior attention, this whole thing, in a way that would never happen to women. You do not get looked at as like, wow, you're such a great parent because you took parental leave. And yet if men actually do it, they get lauded as like, what an excellent parent that person must be. And so I think there is this whole kind of structure needs to be broken down to say, as you say, there are cycles in life and that we all need to contribute. And hopefully pandemic and the kind of forced easing that has happened has shown that we need more flexibility in our structures to allow for people to have lives. Lorraine, I was wondering if maybe from your work you could talk a little bit about some good practice towards ensuring some processes, some practical things that you've seen that help break down some of those equity barriers.
And I would say from my perspective, and even with the businesses, some of the great businesses I work with, it's too early in the journey to be sharing wins. Bearing in mind that this business incorporated in July of last year, and we really started working actively with businesses in around October time. This, it's by no means a sprint, and these things will absolutely take time. But what I would say as best practice for every single business that we've worked with, that there's been two really key standout things that I think are really essential as part of the journey. And I mentioned before around understanding where you are. So being able to conduct surveys, it's a great time to do that, actually, to check in with where your teams are at, just having given, the past 12 months that we've had. So having surveys, interviews, focus groups, and really understanding where your business is at from a cultural perspective. The other thing that we have been active in doing an awful lot of is delivery of workshops. If you think about hospitality as a sector, not only do we have diverse ethnicities and nationalities within the sector, but we're outward facing, we deal with customers. Yet prior to June of last year, there weren't very many businesses actively delivering workshops that upskill and equip teams on having conversations about race, anti-racism, understanding difference. And again, this all will come out in our white paper that we release at the beginning of next month. And it talks about, I hate calling it training because I don't believe it's training. It really is upskilling and workshops. But those are the two active things that businesses have been keen to embark on. But what I am really not about here and now is, I'll call credit where credit is due. And we're too early in the journey, as far as I'm concerned. I sit here and I mention again that I've worked in the sector for a very long time. I couldn't name 2 Black directors in hospitality businesses in the UK. And so until I see actual evidence of change, then absolutely, we will celebrate those businesses for sure, but it's too premature in the journey.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also, like you say, call credit where credit's due, but there's too much work that needs to be done at this stage. And that's really understandable. I think it's something that we absolutely reflect on, I guess I stepped into the role as managing director of the Sustainable Restaurant Association in January. And one of the things that is like screamingly obvious in the space of the hospitality industry that we work in, this word around sustainability and this, the kind of Better Hospitality Conference and the conversations that are happening here tend to be even wider and even more male potentially in discussion. I think that there is a viewpoint on sustainability as a bit middle class, a bit kind of posh boy, and and that can then be a kind of self-perpetuating image around sustainability. And whereas in fact, a lot of the things that we are talking about when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to the actual work on the ground, is really driven by either food cultures that are being kind of inspired, borrowed, or straight up appropriated from kind of either BAME or indigenous traditions, or farming cultures and farming ideas and practices. And a lot of the kind of sustainability practices there also are learning from, we're only increasingly learning around the importance of regenerative farming, looking at native tradition around how to farm land regeneratively. And I wondered if either of you guys had any kind of thoughts around why sustainability as a kind of label and space within the hospitality sector seems to be particularly lacking in inclusion, and how we can make it a more intersectional and inclusive space in the UK in particular.
Do you have any thoughts, Joanna? I'm still thinking.
I think it's, from an inclusion perspective, I think sustainability, I think there are a couple of things. I think there is a piece around authenticity. Again, the customer consumer facing, does it match how you treat your people? Are your ethics? We're doing a series of webinars in June on the ethical leader, which kind of concentrate on the S and the G and the ESG, where it really is the core of purpose and human dignity, and how it drives your business. And, so I think there's a piece around authenticity. If you are promoting a sustainable image to your customers and wider, and it's not internal, I think, that's not appropriate. And I think from a wide perspective, I think sustainability, the piece is, it allows your company to progress with diversity of thought as well, inclusion, allowing people to come and bring their whole selves to work, allowing them to thrive. It brings diversity of thought, it brings cohesion. And I think that really, I think that can only do things to drive sustainability in all formats. That's a little bit wider than perhaps you were looking for as an answer, Julian, but I hope that helps.
I think so. I think it's very helpful.
Yeah. And I'm still thinking about the question in many ways, and it's a question I've been posed. So last week, I took part in the London Coffee Festival. I have conversations, relationships with wine producers, whiskey, and we have the very same conversation. The very same conversation, and the problem that we have here is so very complex. But I also do think that in order for representation, true representation, to be visible in any of these sectors, it takes intentional action and intentional behaviours. And all too often, businesses, whether it's recruitment or otherwise, or even the trade press, will opt for the easy option of who is immediately in front of them.
Yep.
And so, without being very specific on the how, I think, and I'll describe this again, and I'm kind of going off on tangents, but I'll come back to the point I'm making. The past two businesses I've worked within has been a 50-50 gender split leadership team. That has not been by accident. Mm-hmm. And so being intentional and being clear on what your aims are will drive behaviours. But unless you get clear, then nothing changes, quite simply.
And I think, just to build on that, it's not only just for your own business. I think it's also, if you're thinking about sustainability, it's about your supply chain.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It really is about what are your suppliers, and I think with the recruitment head on as well, back to the point, it is intentional, to build on Lorraine's point, that it's, if you're recruiting, insist on diverse shortlists. Don't let people get, say, oh, the talent's not out there. That's not
true. Yeah.
you know, and if people are supplying to your industry, supplying you the food, supplying you the drink, you know, you look, it's what are their practices?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you both in some ways have brought up this idea that that shortcutting and that kind of opting for an easier, opting for what's in front of you and what's easy, and relationships that you might already have, it becomes a self-perpetuating system in terms of progression and leadership in the industry. And I know, Lorraine, I think your organization has been doing some mentoring and things as well. Is that right? And in terms of viewing, being able to kind of build those relationships up and down, and change the dynamic. We need to see more people in leadership roles to inspire more people to take leadership roles on, and that sort of dynamic. So wondering a bit how that works in terms of getting organizations to mentor, bring new talent in, have those conversations.
I think that, you know, we touched on the stats perspective as far as diversity, and I think that we know the people are there, but what we also know, you know, one of the key findings from the survey that we conducted at the end of last year is that people of colour experience barriers for career progression. Yeah. And in order to level the playing field, those groups will need extra support to move forward through career acceleration programs, through mentorship. And there are a series of development programs that can be implemented. We recently, actually, this month went live with a mentorship scheme, which sees 29 Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities within the sector being mentored by business leaders from diverse backgrounds. But that's a cog in a very big wheel. And so ensuring that there are leadership development programs in place to progress talent fairly it's a really important part of moving forward. But aside from that, there are other, you know, key measures such as pay. You know, fair pay, it talks to equity within the workplace, right? And that's whether gender or race. Sorry, my internet is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Just completely fell.
No, we heard that whole thing. So absolutely on both the development programs and on fair pay as a kind of basic thing that we all need to address. Joanna, do you have any other thoughts on kind of mentorship or leadership, how you can implement that within
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we run various programs, and one of the programs that we have has reverse mentoring.
Okay.
And where you have someone, so it can be in any format. So you could have, it tends to be a more junior person, but it can be from any characteristic within an organization. So if you wanted to have your senior leaders hear, you know, lived experiences, it's reverse mentoring can also be very powerful because they get to connect and network with people that perhaps, you know, within their organization they would not speak to on a day-to-day basis, and that person can tell them what it's like to be a woman, to be gay, to be, you know, LGBTQ+, whatever is the characteristic in that organization. So that actually is quite powerful as well from a mentoring perspective. But I think measurement is absolutely key, but I will also keep coming back, as we are as the group today, about action. Gender pay gap, you know, has been in for 4 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, what we don't want to get is to a place where companies just report it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then it doesn't drive forward any change or any kind of real difference.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that's clearly been raised this year with the suspension of needing to report the gender pay gap, as if that having a kind of pandemic or you know, the economic hardships of businesses excuses the idea that or implies that they just would start paying women less. Like, it seems like a very weird choice, right, to suspend needing to report on the gender pay gap over the last year, when you still have those employees, and it seems very confusing to me that decision was made.
Well, I think, the fact that they've brought it, they were thinking of suspending it again this year, and at least they've said, okay, you can report now, or you can report in October. But I think it's the message and it's the narrative, isn't it? Is it important? But it's just really what you don't want it to become as a tick box exercise. It needs to be a catalyst for change.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to invite those that are participating to start. If you guys would like to add any questions to the chat while we go, please feel free to pitch in. It's also quite a small group this morning, so don't be afraid to turn your camera off and give us a flag that you want to kind of jump in and say something. I think looking at how we move forward as from these conversations, for organizations that feel intimidated, nervous, the ones that say, oh, I don't want, that shy away from having these conversations because they're afraid to say something wrong, or afraid that they're not, they shouldn't be speaking about race or equity issues for their business. What would be your advice about how to step away from those fears and into a place of having the tough conversations?
I would personally say this: the fear and the discomfort is going to consistently be there, and it's really around getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because if you are a white male, or often a white, or sometimes a white female, having conversations about race and race equity within your workplace, having an honest conversation, it is sometimes an uncomfortable conversation to have. However, you can't fix what you don't talk about. So it really is a choice. And I've stolen the quote from, I can't remember his name now, but equality is not a spectator sport, right? So, decide which you are. Are you a spectator, or are you going to be active in driving change? And then reach out to organizations that can support that journey, myself being one, Joanna's being another. Google is your friend. There's a flurry of loads of resources and companies available that can support the journey. So, it's really about being brave. And Joanna mentioned at the beginning, being brave is super important. Discomfort is not going to immediately disappear. But yeah, that's really all I have to say on that.
It's really helpful. We've got a question coming through in the chat around, it says, I'm thinking that diverse candidates will apply to organizations that are inviting and welcoming and that feel inclusive. What are some tangible steps that organizations can take to improve this and naturally attract diversity by, addressing that welcoming, inviting, and inclusive feel internally?
I keep coming back to the mantra of authenticity, and my background is recruitment, talent acquisition for the industry, and there is, you can have it will become very apparent. You can have the best marketing, right? You can have the best website, you can have the best practices, but that person will know if that's also authentic the minute they step in the door.
Yeah.
And if the two do not marry up, it is blatantly obvious. Yeah. And so I think those are two. And I think, coming back to Lorraine's point, is one of the tangible things you can do is look at your engagement surveys. Because I talk to companies every day and say, what do you have in your engagement survey? Because they talk about representation, which is very important. But I'm like, how included do your people feel?
Yeah.
How do they feel they can contribute? How included they really feel? And a lot of people, say, oh, we don't really ask that. There are lots of mechanisms, whether it's listening groups, whether it's engagement surveys, where you can get that understanding, because your employer branding will only mean anything if your value proposition, what it really feels to live and work here, backs that up. And you won't know that until you ask your people, and understand it. So I think that's one of because you can go out there, you can spend thousands on budgets on recruitment and advertising. It isn't going to work if the other bit isn't. Would you say?
Sorry, Joanna. I was just going to say it will cost you more in the long term, because if you recruit people under false pretenses, they won't stay. And then you'll have to recruit again and they won't stay. So it really comes down to the nooks of really understanding where you are here and now, addressing that, and then you'll be able to retain and attract the best.
I think that is, really, really, really strong point, that you need to understand what it actually feels like to work for you. And you can say anything that you want, but it doesn't mean anything if that's not how it feels to be a part of the organization. Building on that, I think Matt in the comments has a question about the biggest barriers to inclusive recruitment practices. So I'm sure we've all probably seen data around hiring and how different names on CVs affects hiring and things. What are there other barriers to inclusive recruitment, and tangible ways that organizations cannot fall down those traps?
I think Joanna had mentioned before, actually, around, whatever means of recruitment that you're using, you intentionally set out to ensure that you have diverse candidates to interview. I think the term bias is often used. In many instances, it's prejudice and racism, where people's names are discarded on the basis of them having a non-English sounding name, And as an employer, I also think you have a duty to educate your team so that they enter the process not only being clear on the business stance, obviously, but also understanding themselves a bit better. And what I mean by that is, every business I've ever worked with, they always talk about their 86 nationalities, 19 nationalities. And with an international team comes different experiences and understanding of difference, right? And, I said it earlier, I'll say it again. If an employer takes the time and spends the money to upskill their teams to truly understand difference whilst aligning them to the company values and culture, then the fruits will be bared throughout all areas of the business, not just recruitment, but through leadership, through management. It kind of lives and breathes within the organisation itself. And so I don't know your thoughts, Joanna, on things like blind CVs, because I think blind CVs, it kind of delays the problem. People get through certain hurdles on the basis of no name, but actually, if the fundamentals within the organisation are not fixed, then they face them once they arrive,
Completely. And it was really interesting. I was having a conversation about this the other day, because I agree with you. I think blind CVs kick the can down the road in many instances.
Yeah.
And also for our industry, where again we come back to systems, we don't have the systems to do that. It's a manual process, and when you think you've got hundreds of waiters, whatever it is, it's just not a practical solution. And I personally, I would remove CVs.
Yeah,
and that's a controversial piece, because and it's not just race and it's not just gender, it's age. The amount of conversations I have had with people in the past going, and I know they're looking at the age, and I know they dismiss people because of their age, which infuriates. I know they've dismissed because of the schools people did or didn't go to, the counties they've lived in. I mean, seriously, some of the conversations. I remember. I won't take him. He comes from Essex. They all live with their mums. I mean, I'm being facetious to make a point, but if you extrapolate that through, and it is, and I think it's really important to call out that there is bias, and some of it is unconscious, absolutely, and some of it is implicit. And I think it comes back to allyship, and I think it comes back to role modeling. And when you see it, if you are part of a discussion, you have to call it out.
Yeah.
And the more diversity you have as part of your recruitment process, I'm very passionate about awareness and acceptance of autism as well. I have a little boy who's autistic, and you know, a normal recruitment process would stop him getting a job at every single point.
Yeah.
So I really think, in my heart, I'm an idealist. I think being more creative about how you use JDs, how you use the tools of recruitment, is something that will drive greater diversity.
Yeah. I saw a business recently that was hiring that had said to submit to write a cover letter and submit your interest, but it also then made a point to say on the job advert, if writing isn't your thing, feel free to leave a voice memo at this, this. And I thought that was brilliant, right? Because in what instance it was a kind of front of house role, in what instance do we need that person to be a talented, skilled writer that can communicate in a cover letter their experience? If they could communicate that orally to you, or if they could suit the job in another way. And I think you guys have both raised points around kind of ease and habits that we get into, and I think CVs is one of those where we get, or job descriptions where we get in the habit of just putting degree on a job description that the job doesn't actually require a degree, or there's not a reason for it to require a degree. And so if we all can kind of rethink how we use those tools, I think that's a really good point, Joanna.
What's the job, and what are the skills for the job, and how can you help that person demonstrate those skills to you?
Yeah.
And I know that it's about volume, and I know that you need to have tools to help you come to a shortlist. So I'm not being impractical, but I think there are definitely different ways to be able to do that.
Yeah. One more kind of question that's in the chat. Would be great to hear a kind of sense of which organizations have made significant improvements in this space, or again, more examples of organizations that have taken actions that you guys have looked at and said those are great steps forward.
I'm going to say one organisation, because they're very honest and they know that they still have a lot of work to do, but they've taken, I think, some of the most progressive actions actually, and they still know there is a lot to do, and that's Green King. And they have changed the way they look at their performance management. They have changed the way they look at their JDs. They literally are looking at and because they know that there is still a lot to do, but of a lot of the companies there as I said, I think, as Lorraine said, I think there are a lot of companies that are still at the very start of their journey, but I like the way they know that they still have to learn, but they're starting to think very differently about how they can do things. Is
there anyone else that I know you were saying, Lorraine, before, that we don't want to?
I haven't got any, to be honest, and
preemptive.
Yeah, I'm not in a position. Maybe ask me in 12 months and maybe I'll be able to share. But one of the best things about all of the organisations that we work with is they're not doing the work for public recognition. They're doing the work to do the work for the right reasons. And so, at this stage, I don't have any to share, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's fair. As we're sort of coming to a close on this session, is there anything else that you guys would like to add as these people that are joining us this morning go back to their own organizations and take these ideas forward? What kind of piece of starting advice would you leave them with?
I think for me it would be use your platform, use your influence, use your platform, and be courageous, ask the questions, role model, lead the change.
Lorraine, do you have any
yeah, I mean, echo everything that Joanna has said. Use your voice, quite simply. use your voice and use your privilege, because it really is the only way we are going to see change happen within the sector.
And it's such a fantastic sector. You know, we've been so, you know, sorry.
Well, I mean, I think that is a really good point to make at the end, right? It's a sector that at the end of the day is so human and core to a human experience, right? And yet there are structural experiences of working in the sector that are degrading and taking away from that kind of humanity of what hospitality is meant to be. So, you know, I think you guys have spoken a lot about courage, bravery, authenticity in approach, using your platform. And then I think the other thing, Lorraine, that you mentioned before, that I think I would love to wrap up on, is to seek out the organizations that can support you. And what you guys have been doing with Be Inclusive Hospitality, Joanna, what you guys have been doing, I think asking for that external help, not feeling like, you know, a room of white men and one woman are going to be able to solve all of the challenges within your business. Let's build in some of those voices from the industry, from the organizations that are out there to help. And don't be afraid to invite them in. So thank you so much for your time this morning, for the conversation. It's been really wonderful. It looks like we've got some really great responses in the chat to the conversation this morning. So I really hope that everybody leaves feeling a little bit more courageous and a little bit more inspired to take action, because as you said, Lorraine, it's not a spectator sport. And we all need to be a little bit more active in breaking down some of these barriers. So thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll see you today.
Take care. Thank you.
Love you too, Lorraine.
Take care. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.